Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fitness Managers Report. I am here today with Eliza Kingsford. She is brilliant when it comes to regulating the nervous system, understanding the nervous system, and I had a pleasure of going to her session more, I guess, recently this past Idea World
Yeah.
Fitness Convention. Yeah, it was really fascinating because I believe your content was to help fitness professionals understand their clients' nervous systems and what are they going through when they're introduced to your services. And I couldn't help but notice how interested the fitness professionals were in their own nervous systems. So
Yeah.
it was this, yeah, it was a really fascinating session to be in, not just for education, but to see their reactions. And so today we're talking about the nervous system, understanding your own nervous system from the point of view of a fitness manager, since this is the Fitness Manager podcast. But again, I've had the pleasure of learning from Eliza. She's written several books. She has amazing information on other platforms as well. And she's also a licensed psychotherapist. So we won't dive into all of her specific information, but definitely go find her after this. And I'll be sure to tag her website and other social media channels and YouTube channel in the show notes below on all places you digest podcasts so that you can reach out to her. But we want to identify today recognizing the mindset and belief system and how our nervous system can affect the employees and clients that we work with and affect how we react to things, how they react to maybe the feedback or information we're giving to them. So, as always, I'm going to ask Eliza three quick questions and she can take her time explaining everything. But my first question for her is if you can explain your work and how it relates to leaders and the way leaders behave and interact with their teams.
Yeah, in the spirit of keeping things concise, which sometimes I'm not very good at, so I'm going to try really hard to be better with in our talk today. Um, the progression of my work led me through a number of variables that ultimately ended up in a lot of nervous system training. And I'll spare all the details of how I got there. But to your point earlier, when you were saying that, when I was giving my talk at IDEA and you were realizing that the fitness professionals were very interested in the nervous system from the perspective of themselves, that's what I find happens anytime people are learning about the nervous system in a deeper way, because we can't help but filter it through our own experience. And that's good, actually, because that's what I teach. I want people to think about, when we're talking through the lens of the nervous system, to think about their own systems. It's one of the mistakes that we make. And so this is getting to the leaders part. It's one of the mistakes that we make, is that we have been trained to think through the lens of, story or content and what happened and what are the details and who said this and who did what and who needs this and who needs that. When we start to learn about the nervous system, and we can get good at going inside first and recognizing what's happening in our physiology. I always remind people, this is physiology. It's not psychology. It's not, I mean, it is psychology, but it's not beliefs, it's not stories, it's not even mindset. When we start with the nervous system, it ends up as those things, right? It turns into stories, beliefs, mindset, identity, all of that stuff. But where it starts is physiology, meaning it is not a conscious act that's happening in the body. The physiology is, for lack of a better term, giving us cues, sending us signals, telling us something. And then the brain picks it up later, makes a story and a belief and mindset out of it. That's later. But when we can start talking and thinking about things through the lens of the nervous system, most importantly, through our nervous system first, it can really change how we experience. I mean, not to overstate it, but quite literally every relationship, every experience, everything that happens in our day-to-day lives. It's that powerful, yeah.
That's great. That's a great way of explaining it. And actually, if you don't mind sharing from a nervous system perspective, I remember you giving some examples about, like, let's just throw out their stress.
Yeah.
Being a fitness
Yeah.
manager is very stressful.
Yeah.
And like you
Yeah.
said, we create stories about the people we work with, the scenarios we're positioned in, and the challenges we face. But what would you say are, and this does kind of lead to our next question of what are sometimes the biggest mistakes managers make, but what are some of the, I guess, the best analogies you have for the nervous system when it is challenged that help prompt us to create more upsetting stories and scenarios for ourselves?
Yeah. So I would say, to back up, I've given trainings to various corporations and businesses from the perspective of teams and how to use this information uh, with teams. And here are a couple of things that I always tell, that I always make a point to spend some time on, which is that to oversimplify the structure and anatomy of the nervous system, a good takeaway to remember is that when we are in a threat response, so there's a couple of different pieces of a threat response, but let's just call it the threat response. So when we are activated into a threat response, in other words, our sympathetic system is online, we do not have access to the same functions. We do not have access to the same set of skills from an executive functioning standpoint. So we don't think through things in the same way. We don't have access to creativity, ideas, growth, development, right? Curiosity. If you can imagine, so the best way to think about this is from an evolutionary perspective. If you were walking around when you in, let's call it hunter-gatherer days, and you accidentally mistook a rock for a lion, right? So you thought it was a lion, but it actually was a rock, right? That was better for you then versus the other way around, meaning you thought it was a rock, but it was actually a lion. Okay, so right, we get what that means. So it is from an evolutionary perspective, when we sense danger, we almost overreact because it's much safer for us from an evolutionary perspective to accidentally think everything's bad when it's not. Does that make sense? So from an evolutionary perspective, we are designed to shut off all clarity, curiosity, mental functions that would help us, for example, process through a difficult situation better or listen to another point of view better, right? We shut off access to those things when we're in a triggered state. Now, that becomes really important, especially as leaders, because as we know, usually the culture of the organization follows the leader, right? And so if we are fostering a culture of fear or dysregulation or activation or a lot of conflict, and based on what I just told you, the employees, they don't have access to the same set of functions and skills when we're in an environment like that as they would if they were in an arguably, we're going to call it safe environment. I'm using air quotes here, but only because safe from the perspective of emotional or psychological safety, right? And so that's, priority number one is what type of culture are your employees in? Because we know right off the bat that if we're living in a heightened state of conflict and dysregulation, they're not going to perform to the best of their abilities, right? They don't have and it's not. Again, this is why I talk a lot about the physiology. It's not because they don't want to, or because they're stubborn, or they're choosing not to, or because they're just no good. It's because they can't from a physiological perspective. So that's one of the biggest takeaways that I try and help people understand. And on the heels of that, right on the heels of that, is that's why it's so important for us to understand our own systems first, because especially as leaders, as managers, one of the mistakes we make, like I started the conversation with, what is that we get caught up in story and details and content and things like that. And we don't and we don't know, we don't, most people don't know or have the, they haven't been trained in it yet to understand that the way that we respond to people is always filtered first through the lens of our own nervous system, right? So if we are dysregulated, or our mental load is too full, or we have too much on our plate, or whatever it is, if we are not in our most regulated state, same thing is true for us. We also are not responding to the best of our ability. We also are not taking information in. And this is, I think, the most important piece of this. And then I'll I'll stop talking here. But when I say we don't have access, what I quite literally mean, for example, when there is danger in our environment, or we perceive danger or discomfort in our environment, our middle ear is tuned to a different frequency than it is when it does not sense danger. So that we're hearing tones of voice differently. Our eyes are tuning to facial expressions differently. So you see the facial expression on someone differently. So if we walk into a room together, you and I am dysregulated and you are regulated, you're going to see a face and you're going to think that it's neutral or friendly. I'm going to see the exact same face and believe that it's dangerous. That is the power of our physiology, and it impacts our lives every day. I mean, it's that important, you know?
Wow. Yeah, that's all very, very helpful, especially going from, I love how you took it back to like caveman days to where we are now and why our understanding our nervous system helps affect positive or negative the people we lead. And in the fitness industry, I couldn't help but notice too, as I think about the roles of our instructors and the roles of the personal trainers or massage therapists, or now I feel like managers are overseeing a big group
Mm,
of talent. They need to be creative. If we're holding back their creativity or their sense of safety, it can really affect the way they perform as an instructor, as a personal trainer.
yeah.
And then I also couldn't help but notice that there's times where I know I ask for feedback myself as a leader, and good leaders do that. But if you are dysregulated and you're asking someone who's terrified of you what you will think, you're not going to get honest feedback.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I mean, two pieces to that. The first piece being, if you're dysregulated, it's not, I mean, again, when we're talking through the lens of the physiology, and we're going to talk, I'll call it psychological safety or emotional safety. If you're dysregulated, you're holding a lot of, anxiety, angst, whatever, doesn't matter what it is. It's not safe to hear possibly vulnerable feedback from someone else. From a physiological perspective, that's not safe. And so it won't be accessible for you to receive feedback in a safe way. In other words, if we ourselves are dysregulated and someone were to give a piece of feedback, even if it was just mildly constructive, as in, I don't know, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but just a tiny bit of constructive criticism, right? Something where you and I in a regulated state might say, no big deal. Again, to a person who is dysregulated, that will feel very threatening, and we end up there what we call a neuroceptive mismatch. There ends up being a large amount of danger or threat in a tiny thing because of the way that we started in our state, not because of the thing that the person said. And then from the other end, right? So the person who is sitting in front of you, terrified, as you said, if that person is terrified of you and you've just asked them for feedback, right? It's not safe for them to give it either. And so, and so here we are, we have two dysregulated, unsafe nervous systems trying to have a constructive conversation. And I mean, look, it's Pollyanna of me today in 2024 as we sit here, but I hope it's not at some point that I want to completely disrupt the way that we even think about relationships in the workplace because of examples that we're giving here. It doesn't make sense. Nobody benefits from that. Neither the person who's being asked to give feedback nor the person who's trying to receive feedback. So again, I say we have to take responsibility for our own systems and understanding how those systems are constantly in interaction with those around us. I do this all day. I'll give you an example this morning. Do we have time to do that? I'll give you an example of perfect. Um, just this morning. And I teach this and live this every single day of my life, mind you, right? I have a beautiful 11-year-old daughter who I'm obsessed with. And we were joking around in the kitchen as we do in the morning. She's getting ready for school. And I said something we joke around a lot. There's a lot of sarcasm going around in our house. And I said something that I thought was silly. It was clear she didn't think it was silly in that moment, right? Like something about it, you know, it sparked something in her. She retorted with something, she retorted with a comment that she knew might upset me. Believe it or not, I happen to be a little bit sensitive around my curly hair. And she mentioned something about my hair being frizzy and, the way it was looking. You could tell that she was trying to kind of, bite back a little. That's okay. That's fine by me. I first mistake responded to her and said, "Oh, wow, Quinn." Okay, so sarcasm was not warranted there, but here I was. Wow, Quinn. Okay. So she leaves the kitchen. I'm in the kitchen. Here's where the story goes. I can tell that she's upset, right? Like I can tell that she's upset that we just had this interaction. We are very close. And I am in the kitchen not speaking to her and she's not speaking to me. Now, mind you, I am an adult. I am very much an adult, right? And yet I am not speaking to my child because I got my feelings hurt by something my 11-year-old said, right? And she's getting more and more upset. Why? Because as a child, her system is learns how to regulate through my system, right? And what am I doing? I am not speaking to my 11-year-old child because she just said something that hurt my feelings. This is not okay. I recognized it pretty immediately because I have so much practice. And I was able to recognize you are icing out your child because she hurt your feelings. And what are you teaching her? That in order to receive affection from you, she has to come apologize. Now, am I justified in wanting an apology? From a content perspective, this is where I'm going with the details of the situation. From a content perspective, sure, someone would argue, well, yeah, she should apologize for what she said to you. But that didn't matter because what was going on behind the scenes is that my dysregulated system is communicating with her dysregulated system, and neither one of ours are getting more regulation. So while the details would warrant you deserve an apology, you should give one, none of that is helpful. So I went to her and said, I think I hurt your feelings. And then I think you hurt my feelings in response. And then I ignored you, and that's not okay. I'm sorry for doing that. So, what I was modeling to her is that we had this rupture between us. And here's the repair, that it's healthy and safe to repair when we have a rupture like that. Now, these are all nervous system. This is all part of the nervous system. It's how we are it's how we develop our nervous systems. You and I were talking about you have baby and you're going to develop her nervous system, right? And this is how things get developed. My point to all of this was I am a grown woman who teaches this work, and yet still my system can get triggered into dysregulation, and it's my job to be aware of that and to work with it and to do it differently. And more so, as a parent, my job is to teach my child how to regulate and be safe in her system, which I tell you this story because it's something I try to teach everyone when I'm teaching nervous system work is that point is not to always have a regulated nervous system. That is not the point. That is never the point. It is not the way our nervous systems were designed, nor is it an achievable goal. We wouldn't want that. We want our nervous systems to pick up cues of safety and danger in the environment. We want a flexible system. That's what we want. And that is the crisis of our culture and our times right now, is that people do not have flexible systems. They have very rigid systems, and their systems are going around triggering each other's, and they're so rigid that the vulnerability to go to 11-year-old child and say, honey, I messed up and I'm sorry, even though arguably she, maybe she owed me an apology, but the flexibility to say, I messed up and I'm sorry, that's a sign of a flexible system that can more fluidly move between the states. And more so, it's teaching how to repair when something gets ruptured. And those are skills that arguably too many adults don't have, so trying to pass it along to the kids.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, so many adults do not know how to, I think, handle or behave in that situation. And it's not necessarily that we need to blame our parents or, the people we may have been with, but the biggest thing that I appreciate about that whole story is that the next question I was really going to be asking was, how do part of me was thinking while we were going through the first questions, like, how do we make sure our system is regulated? How do we ensure that that is how do we work on that? But as you described in telling that story, understanding that our systems are meant to be dysregulated, it's going to happen, preparing ourselves for that to the best of our ability. And you shared some strategies and described some reasons why you had been able to identify what your behavior was, what your daughter's behavior was, and then how to respond to it in that story. But is there anything else that you would recommend to, I mean, you mentioned flexible, I liked how you even said that yes, I forget the word you used, but yes, like the formal reasoning is that she should have apologized, but
Hmm.
she didn't. The more
Yeah,
formal versus the realistic, I guess,
yeah.
expectation. So yeah, if you could describe that a little bit more, and then what strategies you or tools you try to give to people that are in a leadership position to help them, again, not necessarily regulate their nervous system, but respond and be
Yeah.
careful when they are in a tough situation.
Yeah, I would say, man, there's so much good stuff there. So what you were referencing was, so many of us get caught in the story or the details of something that's going on. And it's not that the details don't matter or that they're, irrelevant, but when we understand that those details, that story, um, is not as important as our state, right? And we get wrapped around the axle a lot of times, sort of, that's where you're going with that, is like, I could have really dug in and said, no, you owe me an apology. Like, that's not okay. You owe me an apology. When you really look under the hood a little bit, is that what my system was really needing? Do I need my 11-year-old to apologize to me? Well, no. What my system really needs is to feel connected to her, is to feel safe in myself and connected to her. So digging my heels in and demanding an apology, I mean, this is what I'm saying, is that we are too caught up in, I mean, it's how we were trained, it's how we were raised. And to your point, we do not blame the generations before us, because our generations are going to be doing something that will impact our kids, and they will learn and they will do it better, right? We are learning, we're doing it better. They will learn, they will do it better. I fully believe that we do the best we can with the information we have at the time. But to scoot forward into, leaders and how we can, practical skills and tools that we can use to help ourselves, and then that translates to others. I think the most important thing people can do is to learn about the nervous system state. It's not that difficult to learn, but notice the naming, right? So to be able to be aware of our own states and to be able to call it what it is. So, there are three main states, and it's pretty easy to learn how to identify what they are when we're regulated. And then the two states of dysregulation, I teach people how to do that. And recognizing what they are is priority number one, even just in the awareness. Oh, I'm regulated. Oh, I'm dysregulated. And this is how I know. And, this is how I can tell if I'm in dysregulation is enough sometimes to click us into, I'm responding this way or I'm responding this way because I'm regulated or I'm dysregulated. So being able to identify and be aware of our own nervous system states, priority number one. And then right on the back of that is that once we are able to identify and recognize our nervous system states, we then ask the questions, what are the things that trigger us into those states? And what are the things that can help move us out of those states, which I know sounds maybe a little oversimplified, but the problem with like sort of the self-help or the self-care, right? Like there's a lot of focus on self-care, which I fully endorse. However, we've endorsed self-care from the perspective of like the outside in, right? So it's like self-care becomes like, well, get a, massage or a pedicure or go for a walk or whatever. Those are all external that hopefully, if we do enough of it at the right time, that maybe that'll help us change. We want to try to look at self-care from the inside out, meaning what nervous system state am I in? And what do I know helps move me to a safer place? What helps me get out of that state? And what are the tools I can use to do that so that people are not doing things like, writing a gratitude list, checking a box and going, how come I don't feel better? Well, when we do it from the perspective of, oh, I am dysregulated, and my goal here is to get back to a more regulated state, or to be able to ride out this state of dysregulation because I can't do anything about whatever it is, acknowledging the state that we're in, and then asking myself, well, what do I need right now to attend to myself? Then we sometimes get different answers. For example, sometimes I need soft music, sometimes I need music with energy, sometimes I need a walk, sometimes I need a nap, but we don't end up asking ourselves that question. We say, I need self-care, and someone told me that that looks like getting a pedicure. So I guess I'll go do that. I hope I feel better. Well, that's not, we're not doing it from that connected place. So all that is to say, I think doing your part to be aware of and recognize your own nervous system states, and then in conjunction with that, taking responsibility for what state we are in and trying to look from that state and asking ourselves, okay, well, what do I need right now? What might help me feel differently? And there's a lot of processes for determining what those are, and you can map your profiles and all that kind of stuff. But a broad overview would be taking ownership and responsibility, right, for our own states.
Yeah, that's great. And the examples you provided were very helpful. And as you shared, we're going to continue to hopefully become better and better as parents and leaders generationally over time. I want to believe that as well. But I think in each scenario, potentially, as we learn more about ourselves, learn more about our nervous system, learn more about what we may need in that moment, hopefully, every moment we have, whether that's an argument with an instructor or a disagreement or emergency sub that is the sixth time that this instructor has needed an emergency sub,
Yeah.
or a personal trainer having conflict with a client, all of those examples, learning how to learn from those dysregulations, because I know every example of those I've experienced myself and haven't always loved the way I reacted. So I've hopefully
Yeah.
learned from them, and the better I will get at future reactions. Anything else, Eliza, that you want to share in regards to leadership and the nervous system?
Mm. I guess I would just leave you with that, what you were just saying, and maybe you've already felt this, that the more we can tune into those nervous system states and the more we sort of work on them, it's interesting the compounding effect, because as we build more flexibility and resilience in our system, you can have, right, the sub that didn't show up and the scheduling conflicts and all the things. And those, I always tell people, the circumstances of your lives don't have to change. Your ability to manage the circumstances changes. And so this gives people a big sigh of relief when they go, oh, actually, I don't have to rely on something to be totally different in order for me to be okay. And so as we work on this with flexibility and resilience, that's what we find is that we are able to handle more of the changing circumstances in a more manageable way. It doesn't mean we don't get into a little dysregulation or we don't, go back and forth through the states, but we're able to come back into regulation easier and we feel more flexible with it. So that's when I find people take a big sigh and go, oh, okay. Because we're not always worried about the other shoe dropping because, oh my gosh, I can't have one more thing on my plate or I'm going to explode. That doesn't feel good, right? We've been there before, I'm sure. And it doesn't make us feel safe in our environment.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. And I think what's so great is that your goals and your advice are very realistic things that managers can do right now with their teams, with themselves. And there's so much more that you can unpack from Eliza's work, from not just the perspective of a manager, but definitely check out her site, check out the books that she's written because it does help from a perspective of clients that we definitely work with within our fitness facilities and the teams that are helping those clients. So definitely look into more of her work. I cannot thank her enough for her time today. Thank you everyone for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat in the comments. And of course, I'll be sharing a lot of Eliza's information and how to reach her as well. Our next podcast episode will be with Victoria Tolbert Ashley, and she will be talking. It's probably the perfect episode to come right after this, actually. Her episode in what is it? It'll be April. She'll be talking about the value driven fitness manager. So she'll be actually talking about how do your values align with the clubs and companies you're working with now? And if they don't, what is your exit strategy? So we're going to get really real on what to do to make yourself or help you have a great life as a fitness manager. But thank you again so much, Eliza, for your time and your insights.
Of course. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks for having me.